Well, I think every one of us looks for opportunities to work with Senator Manchin, and we found those opportunities. I actually think when Stacey Abrams immediately endorsed Senator Manchin's proposal, it became the Stacey Abrams substitute, not the Joe Manchin substitute.
So there's 100 different ways that I can think of unpacking this. But when you hear that, what is Roy Blunt doing by randomly throwing Stacey Abrams' name into something that we all know that Joe Manchin has been working on potentially for months?
Jason, we don't have enough time in this show to unpack everything in that statement. First of all, throwing out Stacey Abrams' name was clearly a bullhorn to the Republican Party about the fact that Black folks need a compromise. But, let's put this in perspective. This compromise was dead on arrival. They never wanted to be for it. At the end of the day, and I want to add to this, it's not just voter ID, but if we look at some of the things that he recommended, it's really about what goes to the heart of the Republican Party, which is states' rights. Mitch McConnell is clear, the feds do not need to be in the business of protecting voting rights. That should be left at the state level. And what he did in his compromise was that he would weaken the Department of Justice authority to be in the middle of these voting rights fights. And we know that the Biden administration just said that they were doubling the number of lawyers in the voting rights section. And for us who are voting rights lawyers, we need the federal government on our side. And I want to put this in perspective because the urgency is here. The House is on fire. We have a Supreme Court that's getting ready to decide a very important voting rights case, which could kill the Voting Rights Act in the next couple of weeks. Redistricting is coming up in the congressional elections in 2022. And so if they don't do anything now, we are in trouble and democracy is in trouble.
Cliff, I want to go to you on this because I'm very bottom line about what's important about these bills and when these bills actually matter. You are out in the streets. You and LaTosha Brown are traveling around the entire country. You see what's going on. Obviously, the Democrats are not going to be able to get everything that they'd like. The progressives aren't going to be able to get everything they like. But by the end of this year, what has to be passed at a federal level in order to have a puncher's chance for remotely fair elections in places like Georgia, Florida, and Pennsylvania next year, from your perspective?
Yeah. So first of all, you've got to have more access to the voting. Some of the things that even Manchin is supporting, right? The expanded number of days for voting, make it easier. Restrictions on closing polling places. So all of those provisions are important. I really think that something that's missing is that there's got to be a provision, which I don't think was thought of when HR 1 was originally passed, but this issue of overturning elections, which has become increasingly important over the past couple of months, right? That's something that is a trend in all of these state bills. It was in Georgia, it was in Florida. They tried it in Texas and failed. We see what they're doing in Arizona. Whatever the final version is, has got to include something around that. And if I could just say something quickly about this issue of compromise, right? Because as Black folks in this country, whenever we see in Black history or American history this issue of compromise, usually we're on the short end of the stick. 3/5 compromise, right? Missouri compromise. If you don't know it, just go Google it. But you can't compromise when one side is not dealing with reality, right? They're dealing with a lie. If I'm negotiating with my child over whether to get a dog or whether to get a unicorn as our pet, I can't compromise on the unicorn because it's not real. And that's exactly what's happening in this situation. He's compromising on a position that is simply not based on reality.
Yes, I enjoy any My Little Pony references and unicorns during the show. Sam, I want to play you this sound. This goes exactly with what Cliff is talking about here. So you have this situation where overturning elections is the goal, right? You have a lot of Republicans who just want to make it hard to vote. But I want to play this sound about what happened with Mike Pence earlier today when he was speaking to a group of conservatives.
And I want to thank my friend Ralph Reed for those overly generous words. I'm deeply humbled by them. Ralph Reed knows me well enough to know the introduction I prefer is a little bit shorter. I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order.
Sam, people are screaming traitor at Mike Pence, the guy who 6 months ago people were trying to hang. If this is the feeling of the Republican Party, that he's considered a traitor because he wouldn't break the Constitution in order to throw the election for Trump, is there any way of any type of negotiation that could happen at the Senate or even at the state level if this is where the core of the Republican Party and conservatives are?
Well, first of all, Cliff just blew my mind about unicorns. I had thought they were real until this moment. So, Cliff, you destroyed my mind there. As for the Pence-Trump thing, look, this is not obviously a Republican Party. This is a Trump party. If you think of the Faith and Freedom Conference, I don't know how many, if any, you all have been to over the years. This is the sort of ideal setting for Mike Pence. I mean, these are the people who he appeals to the most in the conservative movement. For him to be heckled, and admittedly, it wasn't like the full audience was heckling him, but it was heckled. For him to be heckled like that and called a traitor goes to show you the totality with which Donald Trump has taken over the conservative movement and republicanism. This is not a party. It is a cult of personality that's geared towards Trump. So to answer your question, the only deal you can really cut under those circumstances is a deal that Donald Trump would essentially say is okay, right? I mean, he would have to give his stamp of approval to something like that. And what we know about Donald Trump right now is that his intense focus, a paranoia of sorts, is on voting and making sure that the election is cast into doubt. And so I have some serious doubts myself that Donald Trump would ever sign off on any voting rights legislation on the federal or state level unless it went totally towards the way of casting doubt on the 2020 elections.
And Diane, I want to close with this because this is important. So we got to look at the White House now. We've seen what's happening in the Senate. We've seen what's happening at the lower level. Vice President Harris has been deployed. She has been parachuted in to try and spearhead some of these voting rights efforts. What can she do? I mean, at a practical level, this obviously shows that Joe Biden cares and the whole administration cares. But is there some unique skill set or ability to negotiate that Vice President Harris might have, or some expertise she might have that makes her a good point person for the battle for voting rights?
Well, I mean, I think a few things. One is that she was a senator. She has relationships there, not just on the Democratic side. So the idea is that she understands that process. She knows people in the Senate, and that she has always been kind of a voice of reason also. And so the idea is that she's in a very good position to help negotiate, to help move Manchin and the GOP. And so, and she's, she knows voting rights. And so I think she's best positioned. And I think that the president was right to put her up front on this issue. But we'll see. It is not looking good. And we will see next week where people stand and whether or not they are ready to protect our democracy.